This morning, a Ukrainian official tells CNN they will likely run out of artillery shells by May or June. This after President Trump ordered a pause to all U.S. military aid. With us now is CNN Chief National Security Analyst Jim Sciutto. No artillery shells by May or June. That's one impact. What else are we likely to see?
In a word, I spoke to a U.S. military official. The word is devastating. So start with munitions, artillery shells, which had already been an issue for the last several years, getting enough in given the consumption of the shells on the front line. But even bigger is air defenses because Russia is continuing and even expanding its onslaught through the last several weeks and months. And the Patriot missile system, the U.S. Patriot missile system, is the only system Ukraine has that could shoot down ballistic missiles from Russia. They have other systems that could take down drones, which are slower moving, etc. But for ballistic missiles, some of the deadliest, that is only the Patriot could take it out. So they begin to run out of the missiles that supply those air defenses. The next level, which will be devastating, would be the loss of intelligence sharing, because the intelligence sharing goes in both directions. One, it's about picking your targets on the Russian side to push them back. But it's also overwatch as you're watching all these weapons come in. Without that, Ukraine is at an enormous disadvantage. And then the final one is morale. I've been hearing this both from Ukrainian officials and Americans for some time, that as they feel America abandoned them, and that is how they view it. I had a Ukrainian officer message me this morning calling it a betrayal. The folks on the front lines who are already suffering are wondering if America doesn't have our back, am I a sitting duck out here? Right? Does that begin to break down cohesion on the front lines? It's a genuine concern.
Look, it's a proud people, but they are so vulnerable and they can only take so much. So where does this move, Jim? Where do you see it fitting into sort of the evolution that we've seen among some Republicans especially?
This is a much bigger shift than just Ukraine. Ukraine is one piece of it. And we should note that this is not entirely new, right? This will be the third time Trump and/or Republicans have suspended military aid to Ukraine with impact. Subject of the first impeachment, 2019, Trump suspended it because he wanted to get Zelensky to investigate the Bidens. You'll remember the House GOP waited 6 months to add aid, and now we have this again. And by the way, that 6-month pause had enormous impact on the battlefield. They felt it, and it took them a long time to get back to it. So this is a string that shows you that Ukraine is not a priority for this president and hasn't been for some time. The thing we have to be conscious of, it is not just Ukraine that he is signaling moving away from. It is Europe as a whole. And look at his public comments, right? You got to do more on your own, which is a fine position for an American president to take. But the way European leaders are taking this is that the U.S. will no longer protect us. We are on our own. You hear that from the chancellor-to-be in Germany, right? That we cannot rely on the U.S. to defend us as the U.S. becomes more aligned with Russia and Europe, which is a remarkable statement to make. But these moves together put us closer to Russia's positions on these issues than our own treaty allies. That's a remarkable development.
It really does seem that way, at least in terms of negotiating an end to the conflict inside Ukraine. Jim Sciutto, great to see you in person. Thanks so much.
Get a final expert review before you file.
It really does seem that way, at least in terms of negotiating an end to the conflict inside Ukraine. Jim Sciutto, great to see you in person. Thanks so much.
Ukrainians woke up to the news this morning that President Trump is cutting off all military aid to their country. This is just days after his clash with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. This ban applies to all military equipment that isn't already inside Ukraine. Experts say the impact will likely be felt in a couple of months. The Kremlin is praising this decision, saying it could push Ukraine toward the peace process.
Overnight, Pamela, Russia launched almost 100 drones at the southern port city of Odessa in Ukraine, injuring at least 4 people and damaging a children's hospital in Sumy. Let's go live to CNN's Nick Payton-Walsh. He's joining us from the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv right now. Nick, is there a sense of panic in Ukraine over this U.S. decision?
Yes, in the shortest possible response, Wolf. Although there are bids to put a brave face on this, ultimately this is the key part of Ukraine's military assistance being pulled away, and the most important sophisticated bits. We're told from Ukrainian source that intelligence sharing is not impacted. That's vital for Ukraine to know what their Russian enemy is doing, but what is going to be affected, possibly running out in a matter of weeks, and we know Ukraine counts them day by day, are Patriot air defense missiles. They're the only thing that can shoot down Russian ballistic missiles that hammer Ukraine almost nightly. That is key, and also by May, June, if not earlier, critical artillery ammunition will likely run out as a result of this decision. Now, I'm sure the Trump administration will defend this and say this is about pressuring Zelensky towards a peace that's yet to entirely have been defined, and also too, I think there are other suggestions here that we weren't likely to see a further injection of finance from the Trump administration. This is simply Biden administration aid being held up, but still real shock here, Wolf.
And you have to ask, trying to pressure him maybe on the deal, but also could this add pressure on Zelensky to possibly step aside as Ukraine's president, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, as we've been reporting, the technical aspects of replacing a wartime president here in Ukraine basically make it impossible, or would render a sense of political chaos that would just make the prosecution of the war by the Ukrainians almost impossible. But yes, it adds pressure on Zelensky and that personal rift. And Zelensky has a very hard choice now. He essentially seems to be being asked by the Trump administration to publicly apologize for the Oval Office incident, which they consider to have been his fault, to sign a rare earth mineral deal, which doesn't contain security guarantees that Ukraine needs, but does hand over much of Ukraine's wealth potentially for years, and also commit to an unspecified peace but from the Trump administration. We don't know exactly what peace Trump is asking him to sign up to. Is it the peace that he is negotiating with Moscow, of which we know very little and in which Ukraine is not involved? Is it the peace plan that the European partners are putting together for Trump? Or is it a general sense by the President of the United States that the President of Ukraine is more willing to talk peace? That's a very difficult ask for a wartime commander. And on the other side, the plus of acceding to this, well, Ukraine would potentially get a continuation of aid that it thinks may run out anyway in the months ahead. It vitally needs those Patriots and intelligence, though, Wolf, Paula.
Very quickly, Nick, before I let you go, have sirens been going off in the capital of Kyiv, where you are, with Russian drones and other attacks coming in?
Yeah, look, this is nightly. I mean, for many nights while we've been here, we hear the air defense working here to shoot the drones down. Some nights there are over 200. The last few nights there have been just about 100. But this is attacking all across Ukraine. Civilians are being killed by this on a quite regular basis. And that's away from the hundreds that die on the front lines every single day. So be in no doubt, the pause in this aid will have very real-world consequences on the number of Ukrainian lives lost in the months ahead.
Vice President J.D. Vance just told reporters that Ukraine must, quote, come to the table and start negotiating in order for U.S. military aid to be restored. I want to go live to our chief congressional correspondent, Manu Raju, up on Capitol Hill. So specifically, Manu, what did the vice president say?
Well, he was on Capitol Hill, Wolf, to introduce a nominee to be the number 3 position at the Pentagon. That's Elbridge Colby. And after he gave those remarks at this confirmation hearing, he came out, he spoke to reporters, and he was asked about that controversial and consequential decision by President Trump to halt military aid, suspend military aid to Ukraine, and what it would take to release that aid. And he said that if President Zelensky of Ukraine comes to the negotiating table, then he said all options would be on the table.
Possible aid for Ukraine, leave Ukraine vulnerable right now and give Russia an advantage.
Look, what the president has said very clearly about our Ukraine policy is that he wants the Ukrainians to come to the negotiating table. We want the Ukrainians to have a sovereign and an independent country. We think the Ukrainian troops have fought very bravely, but we're at a point here where neither Europe nor the United States nor the Ukrainians can continue this war indefinitely. So it's important that everybody come to the table, and the president is trying to send a very explicit message. The Ukrainians have got to come to the table and start negotiating with President Trump.
Do you still have hope for the mineral deal? Do you believe that the mineral deal can still be reached with Ukraine?
Yeah, I certainly do. And I think the president is still committed to the mineral deal. I think we've heard some positive things, but not yet, of course, a signature from our friends in Ukraine. But look, the mineral deal is a really important part of the president's policy. Number one, the American people have got to get some payback for the incredible financial investment we've made in this country. A lot of the aid that the Europeans have sent has come in the form of money that is getting repaid to them. Well, it's really ridiculous and frankly an insult to the American people that the Europeans are getting a better deal than the American people. The president is just trying to assure that the American people get a fair deal while simultaneously ensuring we have access to some minerals and resources that are very important for the economy of the future.
And Wolf, there is a lot of pushback on Capitol Hill from that decision by the Trump administration to hold back on that military aid. Republicans and Democrats alike, people like Senator Susan Collins of Maine, who chairs the powerful Senate Appropriations Committee, objecting to that move. Other Ukraine supporters as well, including one Democratic Senator, Richard Blumenthal, who just told me moments ago he believes that that is an illegal move by the president to halt that aid. So expect some more pushback if that is not ultimately released. And Wolf, J.D. Vance also was asked about the issue of those tariffs, so 25% tariffs going into effect against Canada and Mexico, another issue that has caused a lot of concern among Democrats and Republicans members alike. He was referring, when he was asked specifically about the issue of the Canada tariffs, Wolf, he suggested that the issue of fentanyl, he said we need to see real engagement on the fentanyl issue, on the drug issue. This is fundamentally the underlying element of these tariffs. He says that we think the Canadians have not been serious about stopping the drug trade. So you can see the red line from the administration on that issue. The Canadians, of course, have a different view than the Vice President of the United States, but that is where the administration stands as these tariffs have gone into effect and as this halting this military aid has as well.
We will get you ranked #1 on Google Maps in 90 days or less.